We do make choices in our world, and that's kind of what we want to talk to you about for a few minutes this morning. And one of those choices that we make that I think is very important, that we may not think about a lot, has to do in regard to vocation. And again, that's even a word that we don't use a lot, but according to the dictionary, it is a word which means a particular occupation, business, profession, or trade. And so basically we're talking about what we do in regard to our work. Do we really stop and think about, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? Or, a lot of times we'll ask our grandkids, what are you going to be when you grow up? And how much reflection do they really give to that? The old World Book Encyclopedia had a section, since it was designed mainly for kids in school. It had a section called Vocational Guidance. And one of the things that article said was choosing a vocation is one of the most important and difficult decisions a person must face in his entire life. And I think a lot of times we really don't think about how serious, or maybe how important, maybe is a better word, how important that decision is with what we're going to do in life. It went on to say that finding a satisfactory job does not just happen. Each person has the responsibility of planning his own future and taking steps to make sure that he reaches his goal. Knowing how to choose a job wisely and well can help make the hours spent at work much more pleasant and profitable. So when we think about, again, an occupation and what's involved in choosing an occupation. My dad started work when he was 16. And where he started working, I don't think he, put a lot of thought into that. It's where his father worked. They needed help, and he was available, so he went to work. And he worked there for 55 years. I wouldn't want to be in a position where, again, I was working someplace that, again, was not pleasant, that was a burden. And so we need to think about our work and what we're going to do in life. When we think about God and God's intention for us, it was His intention that man work in the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. Back in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15, he says, Then Jehovah God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and to keep it. So he had work to do there in the garden before he sinned. Now, usually we think of, Genesis chapter 3, in the passage that was read earlier for us. But that was, in addition to working, it was now going to become harder. He said to Adam, Because you have heeded the voice of your wife, have eaten from the tree which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth, and you shall eat of the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So work was going to become harder, even though he was still working from the very beginning. There's about 70, and I don't expect you to be able to read this, print's so small, but there's about 70 different occupations that are mentioned in the Bible. Some of them, obviously, we probably don't have. There's probably not a big command today for a chariot commander. But we still have bakers, and we still have cooks, and we still have farmers and fishermen that are on that list. So there's a lot of different things we could do in life. And it is important because it is something that God, first of all, He's commanded. And so that's one reason why we're to work. If we look in the passage there in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul says that you also aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you, that you may walk properly toward those who are outside, and that you may lack nothing. So that's a responsibility that God has given to us as individuals to work. And that's not the only reason. That's enough. God commanded it. But we are to provide for our own. We have that responsibility. And in 1 Timothy chapter 5, he says, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So we have that responsibility to help to provide for our family. And then another responsibility is to help others. While we have that responsibility to provide for our own, there are some individuals, due to the circumstances of life, that cannot work to provide for their own. And that's then where we can help them with what we make. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, Paul says, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. So another reason why we labor, not just for self, but to be in a position to help others as well. There's a proverb, in Proverbs chapter 14, the wise man said, in all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. And, if you think on that a while, there's a lot of truth in that. We probably have heard a lot of people that could give a big talk, as we sometimes expression, but really didn't get down to working and accomplishing that which sometimes they talked about. But what I really want us to spend most of our time considering this morning is making that selection. What comes before actually getting to the work. And that as Christians especially, there are some considerations that we need to make before choosing a vocation, before choosing an occupation. It's that important. First of all, think about the fact, or maybe raise the question, if I choose this particular occupation, is it going to cause me to put God second? Is it going to affect my relationship with God? Now, there's a lot of occupations, jobs that require working on Sunday. You might want to be a mechanic. And there's obviously occupations that work Monday through Friday and maybe sometimes Saturday mornings in that particular field. But if you want to be a mechanic in NASCAR and working in the pit with all the other mechanics, you're probably going to be working Sunday because most of the races are Sunday. When we first got married, we lived in a city that had a professional baseball team. And again, a lot of the baseball games are on Sunday. And there were Christians who were professional baseball players. And when they came to town to play the team where we lived, they'd usually give one of the members a call, and one of the members would go by and pick them up, bring them to services. And then about as soon as services were over, they took them down to the ballpark because that's where they needed to be quickly. So those are things, again, when we're thinking about choosing a job, we maybe sometimes don't think about, but maybe we should, because in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. So maybe we should give some thought to that before we decide in which field of occupation we're going to pursue. And then another question we get asked, will it cause me to neglect my family or the duties, the responsibilities that I have to my family? There's a lot of occupations, well, maybe not a lot, but there's definitely some that require being gone a long time from your family. We used to live down on a town that was on the Ohio River, and a lot of the barges would come down pushing their cargo and so forth. And some of those individuals are gone 6 weeks from their family. I'm sure ocean liners probably are gone much more longer than that. So again, that's something to think about. Is it going to keep me from fulfilling my responsibilities as a parent? In Ephesians chapter 6, Paul says, "You fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." Am I going to be able to do that if I'm going to be gone that long a period of time and over again? Again, sometimes that happens, and that's required. Sometimes soldiers have to go to war, and they have to be gone a long time from their family. But we need to think about it, at least consider that point as we're thinking about, again, the kind of work or the occupation that we're going to do. Another question that I think, probably need to ask is, will it involve me in things that are dishonest? And, we've got to talk about the used car salesman, right? Not all used car salesmen are dishonest, and hopefully we all recognize that fact. But I've had a few lie to me. And you catch them in a lie. And I don't know about you, but when that happens with me, I take my business somewhere else. And it's not just used car sales. We had a fellow come in looking at our furnace, which had a problem. And I kind of felt like I was talking to a used car salesman. Was he trying to sell things and add things on? And when I got somebody else to look at it, that wasn't a problem after all. So there are those that are dishonest. And we shouldn't be naive, I guess, but recognize that fact. But is the occupation I'm choosing going to kind of lean that way? Is it a kind of occupation that's going to put me in a position where I'm constantly trying to get people not to be punished for the thing which they did wrong, or that they did that was dishonest? In Romans chapter 12 and verse 17, Paul says, "Recompense no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men." As Christians, honesty, again, should be at one of those traits that's at the top of our list. We want to be honest toward individuals so that they can believe us not only in dealing with physical things, material things, but especially when it comes to trying to teach them the Word of God as well. And then maybe we should consider the question, will this occupation or will this vocation have me fellowshipping that which is evil? And I expect all of us have heard the cases of the baker who wound up having a problem with his business because there were individuals suing him because he didn't want to make a cake and be part of a wedding that he felt was wrong religiously. There was a photographer in the same situation. I don't know how much you pay attention to the news, but last week the the House of Representatives passed H.R. 5, which basically deals with this very thing. It says there in the law that it is that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act should not provide a basis for challenging the application or enforcement of a covered title. That's a lot of legal terminology, but basically what it boils down to is that you can't use religion to, what they would say, discriminate against another individual involved in participating in something that you believe is religiously wrong. You're not supposed to be able to deny that. You can't say no. And I think as parents and grandparents, we need to especially think about that as we're helping our children to choose an occupation. We have a good friend in West Virginia who's a pharmacist. And again, that's something you might not think about, but in Arizona, this article says, and at least 6 other U.S. states, pharmacists have the legal right to refuse to fill emergency contraception prescriptions, not for medical reasons, but simply based on moral grounds. And when you see contraception, you can think abortion, because that's what this article is dealing with. And that's the point that really involves us in participating in something that we may not, that we would think is wrong from a spiritual standpoint. I'm sure when he went off to West Virginia University to get his degree and become a pharmacist, that was something probably he didn't even think about at that particular time, as it was not really a problem at that time. I worked in the field of education, and again, it's becoming a problem in education. This article in Education Week says that at Silver Creek High School in Sellersburg, Indiana, there are several students who are transgender. Braun, that is the teacher, has to ask her students what their pronouns are and what context she should use them. I know of one teacher who refused to use the pronouns that a student wanted, and he was fired because of it. Because, again, he believed it was something that was wrong. It was not based upon the Scripture. In the last school where I worked, one of the teachers that kind of became a friend to, she was a Baptist. And she'd been teaching several years, was kind of experiencing burnout, as a lot of teachers do. So she was thinking about going back and getting her master's in counseling. So she could still work in education but be a counselor. Well, that was just 3-4 years ago, and I already knew where that was going to be a problem. Because counselors in schools, if there's a transgender student or homosexual student, cannot counsel them against that decision that they have made. They can't even say that it that it is wrong. Or think about being a librarian. Boy, that's surely nothing wrong with that. You're just there and checking out books and so forth. Well, what if one of these drag queens wants to come in and have a reading hour in your library? Are you going to rent them out a room or whatever would be involved in that? In this particular case, this was a case where a woman who was a waitress, and she sometimes gave a 15% discount to customers who prayed over their food. Well, the Freedom from Religion Foundation organization wrote to her and implied that they would sue her if she did not stop her discriminatory behavior. And now again, if the law passes the Senate, President Biden's already said he'd sign it, that'll become the law of the land. I can remember when on Sundays, restaurants, you'd go in and you'd show them a copy of your church bulletin and you'd get a discount or a free dessert or something. Again, this would put an end to that. So, one other example, my cousin is a firefighter in Louisville, Kentucky. This article talks about 2 Christian firefighters were forced to participate in a gay parade that took place in Providence, Rhode Island. The 2 firemen asked for a reassignment based on their religious beliefs and were promptly denied by their superiors. They went to court, and the court, in this case, ruled against them. So a lot of occupations that we think, well, it's not going to be a problem with that. Well, as our culture changes and as time changes, there may very well be a time where I've got to make a decision. And whether I'm going to follow what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 5, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. The word fellowship carries with it here the idea of participating. I can't not participate in something that is evil. And not only should I not participate in it, but I should rebuke it. I should expose it. That's, again, my responsibility as a Christian. But another question that we might ask is, will it harm my influence? We talked a little bit about drinking in class this morning. And what if I got a job working in a liquor store? And if I had a brother who maybe lived down the street from this store and he had a problem with drinking, and as Galatians chapter 6 talks about, maybe he was overtaken in the fault, and I go down to try to restore him and help him get over that. Do you think he's going to listen to a Christian who's working, selling the very thing that, again, has caused him to fall into sin? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 that you're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You're the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So as I think about, again, this is maybe going to be the occupation that I intend to devote my life to. How's that going to affect my position as a Christian? Is it going to dim my light? Or is it going to let my light shine that others may come to glorify God? And then finally, will it corrupt me? Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 says there in verse 33, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. So I want to be careful. What position am I going to be in regard to my influence, in regard to how it's going to have an influence on me? As I think about how I'm going to spend most of my life working and providing for my family. So those are some questions to think about. And as we said in the beginning, we make a lot of choices. We choose where we're going to live. We choose a mate for life. And all of those are important. And this choice is an important choice as well.